The road bent like a question to the low hills of dry Willow Ridge, dust kicking up in tired swirls as the wind passed over it. It was not yet dawn, but light had begun to stain the horizon in strokes of silver blue, soft enough to feel like a secret. Somewhere far off, a rooster crowed once and went silent, as if unsure of its own authority. Lena walked with her head down, her boots silent on the gravel. A fraying yellow backpack hung lopsided across her narrow shoulders, and her coat, 2 winters too small, flapped open in the breeze. Strands of hair escaped from her hood, curls catching light like copper wire. She didn't look around. She never did. Behind her, 7 Mustangs followed. They moved in a formation that seemed both accidental and ordained, wild but rhythmic, like they answered to something older than commands. Not one wore a halter. Not one had a brand. They carried burrs in their manes and scars on their flanks, their eyes dark with something that looked like memory. The gray mare walked at the head, slightly apart from the others. Her legs were long and pale with old white scarring. A jagged blaze ran down the length of her face, like a bolt of lightning carved in reverse. They kept their distance, maybe 8 or 10 feet behind the girl, never brushing her heels, never passing her. But they never failed to come. Not once. In town, people had run out of theories. At first, they thought the horses had escaped from someone's ranch. When no one claimed them, folks guessed maybe they were feral, though no one could say why they didn't just run. Then the whisper started, about curses, about ghosts, about the girl who never smiled, never spoke, and walked with an army of shadows at her back. Lena was 8, though she looked younger. Her eyes, when she lifted them, were too knowing for her age. She rarely talked, even less so since her mother disappeared. That had been 8 months ago, almost to the day. The storm had swept through overnight. Thunder like bones cracking, the river rising and roaring and ripping out the bridge that had stood for 50 years. They never found her mother's body. Only the red scarf, knotted around the stump of a fence post near the bend. Her father had vanished before that, taken in a quiet raid no one in the town wanted to speak of. Federal men with badges and papers had come at sunrise. Rumors filled in what fact would not. Something about illegal wildlife transport, about stolen herds and land rights. Lena had been left with her uncle, a quiet man with a rusted trailer and a 6-pack habit, who barely knew what to do with her. So she walked, every morning, 2 miles in the trailer to the small schoolhouse with its peeling green door and crooked flagpole. And every morning, the 7 Mustangs appeared behind her, rising from the scrub or emerging from the trees, as if the ground itself sent them. No one stopped them. Not anymore. The lead mare had chased off a dog once, jaws still foaming. Another time, when a car veered too close, the black gelding had stepped into the road and stood there, unflinching, until the driver braked hard enough to spill coffee down his shirt. Lena never looked back during these moments. It was like she knew they'd do what needed to be done. At school, she sat in the last row, always silent, always drawing. Her sketchbook filled with horses, over and over. Sometimes just eyes, sometimes hooves, sometimes the same horse again and again, a tall mare with that same strange blaze, rendered in charcoal with ghostly precision. Miss Arlen was a substitute that month. Young, new to the county, hired on short notice when Mrs. Harris left for surgery. She wore soft sweaters and sensible shoes and spoke with a voice that never hurried. On her 3rd day, she noticed a girl in the back corner who didn't make a sound, and she noticed the drawing. "You've got a good eye," she said gently as she crouched beside Lena's desk. She looked strong. Lena didn't respond. Her pencil never paused. Miss Arlen didn't press. But when she rose to leave, she noticed one small thing, a name scrawled in the bottom corner of the page. Maple. The next morning, Miss Arlen left early, took the long road that passed the ridgeline. Just as the sun broke, she saw them, 7 horses moving like a tide behind a little girl with a yellow pack and a red scarf at her throat. She pulled over, heart hammering. She didn't get out. She just watched. The girl didn't turn. The horses didn't stray. They moved like something rehearsed, like something sacred. Later that day, in the teacher's lounge, she asked quietly about the child. She doesn't talk much, said one teacher, pouring coffee. Been like that since her folks. Well, they say the mother's still alive, added another. Some folks think she ran off. Others say she drowned in the river, just never gave her back. What about the horses? Shrugs. Glances. They show up. That's all we know. Miss Arlen went home and sat at her kitchen table with her laptop open and a cup of tea gone cold beside her. She searched for the girl's last name, then her father's. It wasn't easy, but a few clicks brought her to a newspaper from 8 months ago. Local arrest. Wildlife trafficking. One line buried in the story about suspected illegal roundups of protected Mustangs. There was a picture, not of the father, but of a woman, the girl's mother, standing beside a gray horse with a blaze like a wound. The article said she used to work at a sanctuary north of the canyon, that she'd been involved in protests, that she'd fought against BLM seizures of wild herds, that she had gone missing under uncertain circumstances. Miss Arlen sat back, throat dry. The horse in the photo was the same one in Lena's drawing. Later that week, Lena lingered after school, not by choice. Her uncle was late picking her up again. She sat on the steps with her scarf clutched in one hand, thumb rubbing the corner as if trying to erase something. Miss Arlen came outside and sat beside her, without a word. "You draw her a lot," she said quietly after a while. Lena stared at the gravel. "She has kind eyes," Miss Arlen added. "Horses remember things, don't they?" Lena shifted. Then, without looking up, she whispered, "They remember better than people do." The words hung in the air like frost. Miss Arlen didn't move, didn't speak, just waited. She said if anything ever happened, they'd come for me. Lena's voice cracked, barely above breath. Her eyes stayed fixed on the road. I didn't think she meant it. I thought she just said that so I'd sleep. Miss Arlen swallowed hard. But they did come. Lena finished and finally looked up. Her eyes weren't dry. The sky had turned gold behind them, the horizon catching fire with the setting sun. In the distance, Miss Arlen could just barely see the silhouettes moving to the trees, backlit and spectral. 7 shapes, steady as time. She felt a chill then, not fear, but reverence. "You're not alone," she said softly. Lena didn't reply. But for the first time, she didn't look away either. The next morning, the Mustangs were waiting at the base of the hill. Lena stepped out of the trailer, scarf knotted tight, boots dragging, and joined them without a word. The mare was already turned toward the road. The girl walked forward, and they followed, not out of habit, not out of training, but because they knew something no one else did. The rain came down soft that morning, steady as breath, soaking into the thirsty ground and painting the dirt road in shades of umber and ash. Lena didn't wear a coat. She never did, not when it rained. She said she liked the way the water felt, like it was trying to clean things no one else could reach. The scarf around her neck, once bright red, was now faded and frayed, edges curling like petals that had forgotten how to bloom. She walked slower today. The Mustangs adjusted without hesitation, their hooves splashing in rhythm behind her. The gray mare Maple moved closer than usual, close enough that her breath curled into the girl's damp hair. Lena didn't seem to notice, or maybe she did, and simply didn't mind. At school, Miss Arlen noticed too. Lena came in with her jeans soaked to the knee and left a trail of water from the hallway to her seat. She didn't shiver. She just opened her notebook and began drawing again, same as every day. No one made fun of her anymore. Not after Max Gordon teased her last fall, and the next morning his parents found hoof prints circling their trampoline in perfect silence. The rumor had spread fast. Even the kids who didn't believe in curses understood fear when it felt real. Miss Arlen made her rounds through the room, pausing behind Lena. She leaned down, her voice a quiet thread. "Do you ever draw people?" Lena didn't answer, but she flipped back a few pages in her notebook and held it up without turning. A sketch of a woman. Soft eyes. Laugh lines. Her hair pulled back in a braid. Same as Lena's. Miss Arlen studied it in silence. "Your mother?" Lena nodded once. The bell rang before anything else could be said. Later that week, during a storm that rattled the schoolhouse windows, Miss Arlen stayed after class while Lena waited out front. She'd offered to drive her home once, and Lena had refused, not with words, but with a look that closed the subject like a slammed door. Today, Miss Arlen didn't offer. She just walked to her car slowly, watching from a distance. The Mustangs were there already, 7 shapes in the mist, their outlines made ghostly by the rain. Maple was nearest the road, head turned sideways, ears up. Lena walked between them without pause, as if stepping into a memory. Miss Arlen didn't go home. Instead, she drove the opposite way, down an old access road that paralleled the ridge. The rain softened into mist as she parked by an old rusted gate. She remembered something Lena had said once, barely audible. She kept the ones no one else would take. A phrase that meant little at the time, but now carried the weight of something unfinished. The property beyond the gate was overgrown. Sagging fences, a sunken barn roof, the faint outline of an arena lawn reclaimed by weeds. Miss Arlen stepped carefully through the gap and walked toward the barn. A wind chime clinked once in the breeze, a hollow note hanging in the wet air. Inside, it smelled of mold and old straw. Dust floated like breath. She moved quietly, her shoes leaving tracks in the soft earth. In the back corner, covered in a thick plastic tarp, was a file cabinet. Inside, papers. Dozens. Handwritten records. Notes on horses. Sketches. Names. Then a shoebox. It held photographs, weather-stained and curling at the corners. Most were horses, galloping, grazing, standing warily at the edge of the canyon. But one stopped her cold. A picture of Lena's mother, kneeling beside a gray mare with a jagged blaze, hand resting lightly on her shoulder. Behind them, barely visible in the background, a filly no taller than a fence post. The resemblance was undeniable. Miss Arlen flipped the photo over. A date and a line written in neat script. Maple and Ash rescued from BLM lot. Still jumpy but willing. Ash bonds best with children. She pulled out another sheet from beneath the photos. A newspaper clipping. A headline in faded ink. Local woman under investigation for protecting wild herds against federal seizure. Below it, a column of text, some highlighted. Phrases jumped out. Refused to give location of the herd. Accused of harboring unbranded Mustangs on private land. Believed to be aiding in the escape of rounded horses. Miss Arlen sat back on her heels, the floor pressing cold into her legs. She had suspected, but this was something deeper. Not just a woman who loved horses, but a woman who risked everything for them. The sound of distant hooves pulled her up. She stepped outside, heart still rattling, just in time to see them at the crest of the hill. 7 figures, wet and shimmering in the fading light, and walking among them, smaller, determined, Lena. They didn't come near the barn. They just passed by, heading west toward the canyon trail. Miss Arlen didn't call out. She only watched. That night, Lena didn't go home. When her uncle finally remembered to check, the trailer was dark. Her backpack sat by the door, dry and folded, but her boots were gone, and the red scarf. The sheriff was called. Volunteers gathered. Most shrugged when her name was mentioned. One woman muttered, "Always was a strange child." Another simply said, "Check where the horses go." Miss Arlen didn't wait. She drove back toward the barn, flashlight in hand. This time, she didn't stop at the gate. The trail behind the barn was overgrown, nearly hidden, but hoof prints marked the mud, clear, recent. She followed them up the ridge, the beam of her light cutting arcs through the fog. Her breath came fast, her feet slipping once, twice. And then she saw it, a break in the brush, a low, narrow path. Beyond it, quiet. Not silence, a different kind of quiet, the kind that feels like listening. She stepped through. The clearing was wide and flat, surrounded by tall pines that bent slightly in the wind. A makeshift fence still stood in places, half covered in ivy. In the center, a weathered wooden post carved with initials, MR, LS. Lena stood beside it. Her hand rested on Maple's shoulder. Miss Arlen didn't speak. Lena looked up slowly, face streaked with dirt, hair plastered to her cheeks. Her eyes were steady. "I remembered where it was," she said. "She used to bring me here." Miss Arlen nodded, barely able to breathe. She said if anything ever happened, this place would know what to do. Lena stepped aside, and Miss Arlen saw what she was pointing at. A shallow grave, marked with small stones. It wasn't fresh. The ground had settled. There was a red thread tied to the post above it, same fabric as the scarf. "She's not here," Lena said, "but this is where they waited." The wind picked up. The horses shifted behind them, ears flicking. Miss Arlen stepped forward, her voice quiet. "What do you want to do now?" Lena didn't answer right away. She walked to the edge of the clearing, touched the top rail of the broken fence. "I think she left something here, something they remembered." She looked at Maple. The mare lowered her head, touching her muzzle to the girl's chest. "I want to stay here, just for tonight." Miss Arlen hesitated. Then, without question, she took off her coat and laid it over the girl's shoulders. "I'll stay with you." They sat together in the grass, beneath a sky beginning to clear. The stars came out slowly, blinking open like reluctant eyes. The Mustang stood watch, and for the first time in months, Lena leaned into someone's side and let herself close her eyes. In the morning, everything would be different, but for now, she was exactly where she needed to be. The dawn came gray and heavy, draping its weight across the trees like a wool blanket soaked in fog. Mist curled along the pine-needled ground as if the land itself were trying to hold its breath. Somewhere in the branches above, a crow called once, then fell silent. Lena stirred slowly beneath Miss Arlen's coat, eyes opening to the cool hush of morning. For a moment, she didn't move. The scent of earth and horse and damp pine wrapped around her like a memory she couldn't quite touch. She blinked up at the faint outline of the trees, and then at the quiet shape beside her. Miss Arlen had dozed off sitting upright, arms crossed, jaw tilted to one side in sleep too light to be restful. The woman startled awake at the faint shift beside her, brushing a leaf from her sweater. "You're all right." Lena nodded. Her voice was soft in the breeze. They stayed. Miss Arlen followed her gaze. The Mustangs were still there, scattered at the edges of the clearing, grazing or standing watch, their bodies relaxed but alert. Maple stood closest, head down, one hoof cocked in a half-resting stance. She looked peaceful, trusting. They had all stayed. All night, Miss Arlen looked back at the girl, unsure whether to speak, but Lena moved first. She rose to her feet, brushing off her pants, and stepped across the clearing toward the far side, where the fence gave way to a tangle of brush. There was something in her walk now, a quiet certainty that hadn't been there before. Like she wasn't just following anymore. She was remembering. The trees thinned into a narrow path lined with moss and crumbling stone, barely wide enough for two to walk shoulder to shoulder. Lena ducked beneath a low-hanging branch and pointed. "She brought me here once," she said, "before everything." Miss Arlen walked beside her, heart knocking unevenly in her chest. "Your mother?" Lena nodded. There was a tree she liked. She said it grew sideways because it didn't want to stop. They found it less than a quarter-mile in, an old sycamore with a twisted trunk, grown half horizontal before rising again toward the light. Its bark was scarred with old carvings, letters worn smooth by weather and time. Underneath it, nestled between roots, something glinted. Lena dropped to her knees. It was a metal box, small, rusted at the corners, with a tarnished clasp that clicked softly as she opened it. Inside, a handful of photographs, some folded papers, and a thin gold chain with a locket. Lena opened the locket first. Two pictures stared back. One was of her, barely a toddler, grinning and round-faced. The other was a gray mare, Maple younger, her blaze still sharp against her dark coat. Miss Arlen crouched beside her, watching quietly. Lena pulled out the photos next, her mother smiling on horseback, arms thrown around a man Miss Arlen recognized immediately from the article. Her father, but not in cuffs, not in the mugshot. He looked alive, tender. He was holding the reins of a colt that couldn't have been more than a few weeks old. The same amber coat, the same torn ear. Ash! She sifted through the folded papers next, journal entries, barely legible in the light. Most were dated 2 years ago. Scribbled notes on the condition of rescue horses. Feeding logs, mentions of an old trail, used to transport them at night. Then one entry stood out. It was short, written in rushed hand. If something happens to me, they'll know. Maple remembers. She'll find her. Tell Lena to follow the horses. Miss Arlen exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for hours. Lena's eyes stayed fixed on the page. Her hands didn't tremble, but something inside her had begun to shift. She knew, she whispered. She knew something would happen. Miss Arlen sat back on her heels. She was protecting them. All of them, including you. A sound in the brush startled them both. Not loud, just the soft crunch of hooves on old leaves. The other horses had moved closer, forming a wide half-circle around them. Not crowding, just present. And in the space between them stood a new figure, taller than Lena, lean, with a face half hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat. Lena tensed. Miss Arlen rose immediately, placing herself slightly in front of the girl. "Who's there?" The man stepped forward slowly, hands raised and calm. "I'm not here to hurt anyone," he said. His voice was gravel and wind, low but not threatening. "I used to know her mother." Lena stepped to the side, peering past Miss Arlen's elbow, her eyes locked on the man's boots first. Scuffed leather. Worn soles. He looked like someone used to walking farther than most people drove. The man glanced at her, and then at the horses. "I wondered if they'd bring her here." Miss Arlen didn't move. "You were part of it?" "The sanctuary." The man nodded. "Years ago, before everything fell apart. Before the law came down on us like we were stealing gold." He looked tired. Not old, just tired in a way that settled deep in the shoulders. "Her mother told me if anything ever happened, Maple would lead the way. I didn't believe it. Not really. But I came back when I heard about the girl walking with the herd." Lena stepped forward then, slowly, locket still clenched in her fist. "Did you see her? After the flood?" He met her eyes with an ache that needed no words. "No. I looked. I hope. She's not dead," Lena said quietly. "I'd feel it." Miss Arlen looked at her sharply, but said nothing. The man nodded. "Then maybe you're right. I don't think those horses would have stayed if she were." They stood in silence, the clearing still and watchful. Lena handed him one of the journal pages. "She left this." He took it gently, eyes scanning the handwriting with care. "She always said they'd remember better than we do, that they'd carry her love longer than time could." He handed the paper back. "It's your turn now." Miss Arlen frowned. "What do you mean?" "There's another herd, south end of the canyon. Fewer now. Scattered. They need help. And this place, this old sanctuary, it can live again, if someone's brave enough." Lena didn't blink. "I can teach you what I know," the man continued. "But I think they're already teaching you plenty." Maple stepped forward as if to agree, her muzzle brushing Lena's shoulder. The man tipped his hat. "I'll be nearby when you're ready." He disappeared into the trees without another word. Lena stood there for a long time, the locket still warm in her hand. The box clutched to her chest. Miss Arlen rested a hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to decide everything now." "I already did," Lena said softly. She turned to Maple. "I'm not going back with him." "You mean your uncle?" Lena nodded. "He doesn't even know what day it is." Miss Arlen hesitated. "If you want to stay with me, there'll be papers to sign. Processes, but we can figure it out." Lena turned, eyes hopeful but wary. "You believe me?" Miss Arlen smiled, full and sad and true. "I watched 7 wild horses follow you into a forest to a place only your mother could have known. Yeah, I believe you." The Mustangs began to move again, shifting into formation as the sun broke through the trees in golden streaks. Light caught on their coats, steam rising from their backs. It looked like something out of legend. 7 sentinels, and a girl walking home to a life not yet written, but already chosen. Miss Arlen followed quietly, not as a leader, not even as a guardian, but as someone who had been allowed to witness something sacred. At the edge of the clearing, just before the trail gave way to the open land again, Lena paused. The wind rolled down from the canyon that morning, carrying with it the smell of dust, sage, and something faintly sweet, like dried apple skin left too long in the sun. A new fence stretched across the base of the ridge now. It wasn't much, just salvage posts and baling wire tied taut, but it marked the edge of something that hadn't existed a month ago. It marked the beginning. Inside that rough fence, the land was still scarred in places. Patches of ash, broken beams, forgotten footprints where horses had once circled nervously in the dark. But in other spots, grass had begun to grow again. Hoofprints pressed deep into soft earth. Birds flitted between the eaves of the half-rebuilt barn, and the old wind chime, found buried beneath collapsed roof beams, sang faintly when touched by a breeze. Lena stood at the center of it all, her hands wrapped tight around the wood of a newly repaired gate. She wore the same red scarf around her neck, washed and mended, and her hair had grown longer since the spring rains. It curled wild now, caught in every gust like it had forgotten how to lie still. The 7 Mustangs moved through the space behind her like they owned it, and maybe they did. Maple stayed nearest, her movement slower these days, more deliberate. Her eyes were still sharp, but her flanks bore the softness of age, and the hollow dip above her shoulder showed years carved with quiet burden. Lena watched them without blinking. Every shift of weight, every twitch of ear. She could read their moods better than most read words. She knew when Ash was bored or restless, when the bay mare's hips started to ache, when the youngest needed to run just to remember what it felt like. From the porch, Miss Arlen leaned against the doorframe, a mug in hand, her posture more relaxed than it had ever been in the classroom. She wore boots now, broken in and scuffed. A thin braid ran down her back, half undone. Paperwork for guardianship sat waiting on the kitchen table, nearly complete. The school had granted her an extended leave. She hadn't told Lena yet, but she was thinking of making it permanent. "You gonna come help with the feed?" she called. Lena turned slightly, nodded, and jogged toward the barn, the Mustangs parting around her like smoke. She disappeared inside a moment later, the sound of grain hitting buckets echoing through the boards. Miss Arlen stepped off the porch and made her way toward the paddock, eyes drifting to the corner where the old sanctuary journal had been pinned beneath a sheet of plexiglass. She still read it sometimes, those uneven pages in Lena's mother's handwriting. Lists of horses saved, routes traveled at night, names and scars and fears slowly undone. But it was the last page she always returned to. "If my daughter ever finds this place, it means I couldn't come back. But she'll have them. That's enough. They'll carry her farther than I ever could." The screen door creaked behind her. It was the man again. He didn't knock when he came now. He just let the sound of his boots on the wood announce him. Miss Arlen didn't flinch when she heard it. She turned and gave him a nod. "She's in the barn," she said. He smiled beneath his hat. "I brought more hay and some fencing staples. You planning on staying a while?" He shrugged. "Depends if I'm still useful." "You are." He didn't reply. Just looked toward the ridge, where the sun was beginning to rise higher, burning away the morning mist. Down in the pasture, Lena emerged again. She carried a shallow bucket of oats, shoulders square, footsteps sure. She knelt beside Maple, letting the mare eat slowly from her hand. The others waited their turn, as they always did. There was no shoving, no chaos, just rhythm, trust earned day by day. "She's changing," the man said softly. "Every time I see her." "She always was changing," Miss Arlen replied. "We just didn't know her well enough to see it." The man tilted his head. "Think she's ready?" Miss Arlen looked down the road, past the new gate, past the trail that led out into the wider world. "Maybe, but what matters more is that she's willing." Later that afternoon, a truck pulled up to the sanctuary gate, kicking dust into the warm air. It was old but clean, the paint faded to a polite blue. A woman stepped out, older, with crow's feet and a clipboard tucked beneath one arm. She introduced herself as someone from the district, not child services, something else. She had come to see the girl. The story had reached the county council, about a child found living among wild horses in an abandoned sanctuary, about a teacher who followed her into the woods and came back with something stronger than proof. No one had accused. No one had pressed. They had only asked questions. The kind that meant, "Is she okay now?" The woman stood by the fence while Lena walked the Mustang from one paddock to another, calling them gently, her voice light and low. "They follow her," the woman said. Miss Arlen nodded. "No, they walk with her." "Big difference." "All the difference." The woman made a few notes, then watched in silence as the girl turned toward the house. Lena approached slowly, eyes flicking to the stranger's face, then to the clipboard, then to the space between them. The woman smiled. "You're the one who started again, huh?" Lena didn't answer. "She speaks when she wants to," Miss Arlen said softly. "No need to push." The woman closed a folder and tucked it beneath her arm. "I think she's in the right place." She left without needing a tour. That evening, the ranch was quiet except for the rustling of leaves and the occasional creak of a loose board in the barn. Lena sat with Maple beneath the sycamore near the southern fence line, the same one her mother had carved initials into all those years ago. Her fingers traced the bark slowly. "They remembered you," she whispered. The mare didn't move, but her ears twitched. "I think you knew," Lena continued, "that I'd find this place, that they'd bring me here. That would still matter." The mare's head lowered gently until it touched her shoulder. "I'm not afraid anymore." Behind them, the others grazed lazily, no longer needing to stand guard. There was peace here now. Hard won, but real. The sun dipped below the ridge, throwing long shadows across the paddock. A soft golden light bathed everything in warmth. The grass, the fence posts, the girl with her back against the old tree, and the mare who had carried a memory of love across years and storms and silence. In town, they no longer whispered about the girl with the horses. They waved when they saw her. They donated old tack and fresh feed. A few parents even asked if their children could visit, to brush the Mustangs or just sit and listen. Lena had agreed. Quietly but firmly, she let them come in small groups, always with Mississippi Arlen close by. The man built new stalls in the barn. Lena helped him measure and hammer. She liked the sound. She didn't need to any more. She wanted to. And always, the Mustangs followed. Because sometimes when love is given without leash or condition, it learns to stay without being asked. Because sometimes family doesn't return the way we expect. It returns in the shape of 7 horses and a note left in the dirt and a teacher who doesn't ask for anything but the truth. Because sometimes the ones who never leave aren't human at all. The night fell soft and sure. And in the darkness, beneath a star-stitched sky, the ranch that had once been forgotten sang gently with the sounds of breath and hooves and healing.